My husband said, "You'll take the car and be grateful." He never knew I'd co-signed the loan. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I had just come in from outside, still in my coat, keys still in my hand, and it was sitting on the kitchen table where Brennan's assistant had sent it, forwarded from his attorney's office. The envelope was cream-colored and formal. I opened it standing up, the way you open something you have been half expecting. It was 3 paragraphs. The first established that the business was a marital asset subject to valuation. The second outlined a proposed discovery timeline. The third, and this is the one that has stayed with me, the one that will stay with me for the rest of my life, stated that Mrs. Whitfield's contribution to the business enterprise is non-material. I read it twice, not because I did not understand it the first time. I read it twice because I wanted to be sure I had understood it exactly. Then I set the letter on the kitchen table and walked to the study. The filing cabinet is a fireproof model I bought 12 years ago. The binder sits on the second shelf, a black 3-ring binder, 4 inches wide, holding every commercial credit renewal the business had ever executed, in chronological order. I took it out. I carried it to the desk. I opened it to the most recent renewal and turned to page 34. My name was listed as sole personal guarantor on a $2.1 million revolving credit facility. Brennan's name was not on the page. The credit facility renewed annually. Renewal was due in 11 weeks. Without my signature, it could not renew. Without the facility, the business could not fund the 45 to 60-day gap between its billing cycle and its collections, the gap that kept the presses running and the staff paid, and the lights on in the Olneyville facility every night. I knew this. I had known this for 14 years. I had signed page 34 14 times. What he never knew, and what his attorney's letter had not even thought to ask, was whose name was on that line. Not his. Mine, and in 11 weeks, that name was the only thing standing between Brennan Whitfield's business and insolvency. The settlement would come to $2.84 million, but the letter on the kitchen table called me non-material. Good day, dear listeners. It's Sienna again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from, and whether you have ever been called non-material at exactly the wrong moment. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that a woman who works in the background is a woman without power. What they mean is that she is invisible, and they have confused invisibility with powerlessness, which is an expensive mistake. The two things are not the same. They never have been. A foundation is invisible. A guarantor's signature is invisible. The load-bearing wall behind the plaster is invisible. None of those things are powerless. I had learned this not as a philosophy, but as a professional fact. I spent 12 years as a commercial lending officer before I understood it fully. 12 years of reading loan covenants and credit agreements and guarantee structures. 12 years of learning that the name on page 34 is not always the name on the masthead, and that those two names are not always the same person. Power does not always announce itself. Often it sits in a filing cabinet, in a fireproof box, waiting to be read. I thought about that, sitting at the study desk with the binder open in front of me and the letter on the kitchen table in the next room. I thought about how certain Brennan must have been, drafting that letter with his attorney, that I would be surprised by what I found when I looked. And I thought about how long it had been since anyone, himself included, had thought to ask what I actually held. The answer was on page 34. It had always been on page 34. Let me tell you who I am, dear listeners, so that you understand what it meant for that letter to use the word it used. My name is Joanna Whitfield. I am 48 years old. I was born in Providence, raised in Providence, educated in Providence, a city that knows how to keep its secrets in federal-style houses on hills, behind high ceilings and working fireplaces and doors that do not open unless you know who to ask. I know this city the way you know a city you have never really left. I know the smell of the Providence River in late winter, when it carries ice at the edges and the cold comes up through the streets from the waterfront like something that has been held underground all season. I know the light in the financial district on a gray February morning, flat, even, the color of an overcast sea. I know the warmth of the Olneyville neighborhood at night, when the offset presses are running and the smell of ink and paper comes through the walls of the printing facility and out into the street. I know all of these things because for 14 years they were mine, not in name, in practice. Before I left the bank, I was a commercial lending officer, consumer and small business lines, primarily, loan covenants, guarantee structures, credit facility renewals. I was good at it, not brilliant, not exceptional, but good in the specific way that matters in that profession, which is the ability to read a credit agreement in full and understand not just what it says, but what it means if anything goes wrong. Most people who sign credit agreements have not read them in full. This is not a criticism. A 38-page commercial revolving credit facility is not designed to be pleasurable reading. But I had read ours, every version of it, every renewal, and I knew every page. I left the bank 12 years into the marriage. This is the part that requires precision. Because imprecision here is how the story gets told wrong. I did not leave because I had decided to stop working. I left because the business needed someone who understood its financing relationships, and Brennan did not. He was excellent at the production side, the client relationships, the press capacity, the staffing, and he had no patience for the financial architecture underneath. The bank that extended the original SPA loan had required a personal guarantor with a clean credit history and qualifying personal assets. Brennan had a prior business bankruptcy on his record, 7 years old at the time of the application but present. The lender's covenant required a clean guarantor. I was the clean guarantor. I signed. And then I left the bank and came home, because the business needed someone managing its financing relationships full-time, and there was only one of us who could do it. I did this without a title, without a salary, without an office at the facility. I had a study in the College Hill townhouse, high ceilings, a working fireplace, a desk that held the binder and the filing cabinet, and the phone I used to call the bank officers whose names I knew by memory. I managed every renewal, every covenant review, every conversation with the lender about the business's financial position. I was the relationship. I was the name on page 34, 14 times, in 14 years. And the business existed in its current form because of those 14 signatures. Brennan would tell people at the business dinners and the industry events I attended as his wife that he had built the company from the ground up. He used his hands when he said it, a wide, generous gesture, the gesture of a man describing something physical that he had made with his body. He believed it, I think. Or he had told the story so many times that the telling had become the truth. He had never read the credit facility in full. He signed where the bank officer indicated. He did not know the mechanics of what held the whole structure up, because he had never needed to know them, because I had always been there to hold them. The study fireplace worked. I had a chair near it. I spent a great deal of time in that chair in the winter months, reading renewal documents and covenant amendments, and the binder was always on the desk beside me. The College Hill townhouse was a renovated federal style. which means it had history in its bones and complexity in its heating system and windows that let in the cold when the wind came off the river. It also had the particular quality of old Providence houses, which is that the rooms hold light in a specific way, high-ceilinged and a little formal. Not warm in the casual sense, but warm in the sense that things were built to last. I had kept it as it was. Brennan had his facility. I had the house and the filing cabinet and the binder, and for 14 years that arrangement had seemed sufficient. The binder was the thing, the object that ran through every year of it. A black 3-ring binder, 4 inches wide, the kind you buy at an office supply store and never think about again once you have filled it. I had bought it during the first renewal, 14 years ago. I had filed each subsequent renewal behind the previous one in order, so that the binder was a chronological record of every credit agreement the business had ever executed. I knew it the way you know something you have maintained for a long time, not with tenderness exactly, but with the intimacy of habit, the way you know a tool you have used so often that your hand finds it in the dark. I had never shown it to Brennan. He had never asked. The first sign came in the year before the divorce filing. I did not name it when it happened. I noticed it, filed it, and moved on, which is, I think, what people do when they have been in a long marriage and have learned to extend the benefit of the doubt on small operational decisions. Brennan had the credit renewal paperwork delivery rerouted from the College Hill address to the Olneyville facility office. He described this as more efficient. The facility was where the business operated. The business was the primary party to the credit agreement. It made a certain administrative sense. But I was the guarantor. The guarantee documentation was attached to those renewals, and routing the delivery to the facility had the practical effect of removing the documents from my direct site before I could review them in the natural course. I noticed this. I requested copies anyway from the lender's office, as I had always been entitled to do. The lender sent them. I filed them in the binder, and I put the routing change in the category of things I had noted but not yet decided what to make of. The second sign was in the documents themselves. I would not have caught it if I had not been reading carefully, and I was always reading carefully. That was the job. The most recent renewal application listed Brennan as the primary business contact. His name appeared first, at the top, in the primary obligor line. My name appeared below, in the guarantee attachment, described in the lender's cover notation as a standard guarantee attachment. In every prior renewal, all 13 of them, I had been listed first as guarantor with Brennan secondary as the operating business owner. The shift was in the framing, not in the legal substance. My name was still on page 34. My signature was still the one that mattered, but the framing had moved me from the front of the document to an attachment. A standard attachment. I read that phrase, standard attachment, and then I set the renewal down on the desk and sat with it for a moment. Not because I was alarmed, because I was precise, and the phrasing was imprecise, and imprecision in credit documentation is never accidental. I filed the renewal. I noted it. And 11 months later, the divorce was filed, and 3 days after that, the letter arrived. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I had just come in from outside. The air was February cold. The street outside the townhouse wet and gray. The kind of Providence winter day where the sky and the pavement are the same color, and the light has no angle to it. I still had my coat on. I still had my keys in my hand. The envelope was on the kitchen table. Cream-colored, formal. The letterhead of Brennan's attorney's firm, a downtown practice with a corporate law history and a family law division that handled the business end of dissolving marriages, which is what our marriage had become. I set my keys on the counter and opened it. 3 paragraphs. The first established that the business was a marital asset subject to valuation under Rhode Island law. The second outlined a proposed schedule for the exchange of financial disclosures, with a target date for the initial valuation report. The third paragraph, the one that matters, the one I am going to be precise about, stated that while the business constituted a marital asset for purposes of equitable distribution, it was the position of Brennan's legal team that Mrs. Whitfield's contribution to the business enterprise is non-material. Non-material. I want to be careful here, dear listeners, about what that phrase means in a legal context, because its meaning is precise, and that precision is exactly the point. In the language of marital asset division, a contribution is material if it affects the value or the structure of the asset in question. A non-material contribution is one that does not. Brennan's attorney was stating, formally as a legal position, that nothing I had done for 14 years had touched the structure of the business in any way that the court needed to account for. I read the letter twice, standing up, still in my coat. Then I set it on the kitchen table, face up, not face down, because I was not hiding from it, and I walked to the study. The filing cabinet opened smoothly. The binder was on the second shelf, where it had always been. I carried it to the desk and set it down. I turned to page 34 of the most recent renewal, not because I did not know what was there, but because it is precise to check, and I am a precise person, and precision matters in documents. There was my name, Joanna Whitfield. Sole personal guarantor. There was my signature, in the same handwriting I had used all 14 times, and there was the blank where a co-guarantor's name would appear if there were one, which there was not, because there had only ever been one person whose credit history and personal assets the lender had found acceptable, and that person was me. Brennan's name was not on page 34. It had never been on page 34. I sat at the study desk for about 20 minutes. The room was quiet. The fireplace was cold. I had not lit it that morning. Outside, the winter light was doing nothing at all. I sat with the binder open in front of me and the sounds of the house around me, and I felt the thing you feel when two pieces of information arrive at precisely the same moment and their relationship becomes suddenly structurally clear. Not shock, not anger, something more specific than either, a cold and very clear sense of the geometry of the situation. The credit facility renewed in 11 weeks. Without my signature on the renewal, it would not renew. Without the facility, the business could not fund its receivables gap, the 45 to 60-day interval between invoicing its commercial print clients and receiving payment, an interval that kept payroll current and supply accounts open, and the presses running at night. Without the facility, the receivables gap became a cash flow crisis within 90 days. Without the cash flow, operations became insolvent. This was not a threat I was constructing. It was a structural fact that I had understood for 14 years, because understanding structural facts was my job. I picked up the phone and called Augustin Patel. I reached his voicemail. It was early evening by then. I had sat with the binder and the geometry of the situation longer than I realized. I left a message that was, I think, characteristically brief, my name, the fact that my husband had filed for divorce, and the sentence, "I need to discuss a credit guarantee structure." Then I sat back in the chair and waited for morning. Augustin called back at 8:45 the following morning. I knew his name from a professional referral. He had spent 15 years as a commercial litigator before transitioning into family law, which meant he had spent 15 years reading exactly the kind of documents I needed him to read. He had an office in the financial district, in a building that on wet days smelled faintly of the river. We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. That night, I sat in the study with the binder on the desk and the letter beside it. I did not review the documents again. I had read them. What I did, instead, was think about the 11-week timeline with the clarity of someone who has managed credit timelines for 14 years. The renewal was due in late March. We were in mid-February. 11 weeks. The business's quarterly receivable cycle would peak in early April, which meant the credit facility needed to be in place by the end of March at the latest. Any delay in execution would have immediate operational consequences. This was not a large window. I also thought about the filing cabinet and the spa loan file, the manila folder at the back of the second drawer, where I had kept the original loan documentation from 14 years ago. The Keyman insurance policy was in that folder. My policy. Not Brennan's, mine. Because the lender had required it, because I was the guarantor, and because the lender's initial underwriting had required Keyman coverage on the person whose credit was actually securing the line. My name was on that policy too. I had not thought about the Keyman policy in years, but sitting there in the study, I thought about it now. Everything was in the filing cabinet. Everything had always been in the filing cabinet. Augustin Patel was not what people expect when they picture a commercial litigator turned family lawyer. He was a compact man, late 40s, with a stillness about him that I recognized from the profession. The stillness of someone who has spent a great deal of time in rooms where the documents matter more than the voices, and who has learned to let the documents do the talking. He drank espresso. He had a conference table that was clear of everything except what he put on it intentionally. When I set the binder in front of him and told him what was in it, he did not react. He read. He read page 34 first, because that was where I had placed the index tab. Then he turned back to the front of the agreement and read the guarantee section from the beginning. This took approximately 12 minutes. I sat across from him and did not speak. When he finished, he closed the binder and set it on the table and looked at me. "This is extraordinary leverage," he said. "Use it correctly." He explained what I already understood, which is the kind of explanation you give, not because the other person is ignorant, but because you want to be sure you are both working from the same set of facts. Without my signature on the annual renewal, the credit facility would not renew. The bank's covenant required a guarantor with a clean credit history and qualifying personal assets. My credit history was clean. Brennan's was not. The prior business bankruptcy, 7 years behind him at the time of the original application, had remained a covenant disqualifier at every subsequent renewal. The lender had never asked Brennan to guarantee the line. They had only ever asked me. Without the facility, Augustin said, the business's receivables gap, he had confirmed the 45 to 60-day billing cycle from the financial disclosures Brennan's team had already filed, would create an operational cash flow crisis within 90 days of the facility's expiration. He did not characterize this as a threat. He characterized it as a structural fact. The credit facility renewal was due. The guarantor's signature was required. The guarantor was his client. "What do you want from this?" he asked. I had thought about this the night before, sitting in the study with the binder and the letter and the geometry of the situation spread out in front of me. I knew what I wanted. I wanted it stated clearly, without drama, without a performance of grievance. I told him, the townhouse, equitable distribution that reflected 14 years of financing management, and a clean exit. He nodded once. He made a note. He picked up the espresso cup and finished it. "I'm going to write one letter," he said. "It will explain the structural fact. Nothing else." He was as good as his word. The letter went to Brennan's attorney on a Thursday. I did not see the full text until Augustin sent me a copy. It was 2 paragraphs, formal and precise, written in the register of a commercial litigator who had spent 15 years in financing disputes and knew exactly how to describe a guarantee covenant without characterizing it as anything other than what it was. The first paragraph noted that Joanna Whitfield served as sole personal guarantor on the business's commercial revolving credit facility, that this position was documented in the executed credit agreement, and that the annual renewal was due in approximately 10 weeks. The second paragraph noted that the guarantee covenant required a guarantor with qualifying credit history and assets, that no co-guarantor was named in the current agreement, and that the current guarantor's participation in any renewal was a matter of that guarantor's independent decision. No threat, no ultimatum, no mention of the non-material letter. The structural fact was sufficient. Brennan's attorney called Augustin the following morning. Augustin told me about the conversation that afternoon. It had been brief. Brennan's attorney had, apparently, asked several questions that Augustin characterized as clarifying, by which he meant the attorney was confirming that the guarantee structure was exactly what the letter described. Augustin had confirmed it. The call had ended. Brennan's team requested full financial disclosure within the week. This was expected. The letter had made the binder suddenly, urgently relevant, and they needed to understand what they were dealing with. I provided everything. The binder, in full. Every prior renewal, in chronological order. The original SPA loan file, including the Keyman insurance documentation. The lender's covenant requirements. My complete personal financial disclosure, which showed the assets I had pledged as guarantor and the credit history that had made the original lending possible. I also provided the name of Kirsten Mello. Kirsten had been a colleague of mine at the bank before I left, a VP now, at the same institution that held the credit facility. She could not share bank records, and she was careful to say so when I called her. But she could confirm, and did confirm, in a personal call that she understood to be informal, and that I was welcome to characterize as such to Augustin, that the guarantee language in the credit agreement was standard and enforceable, and that the lender's covenant requirements regarding guarantor qualifications had not changed since the original application. She said this without any particular emphasis, the way a banker confirms a fact that is not in dispute. I thanked her. She said, "Take care of yourself, Joanna." Then she was gone, back to her day, which did not involve filing cabinets or binders or the particular precision of a credit facility renewal. Brennan's business appraiser filed his report in the third week. He valued the enterprise at $1, $85 million, which was a defensible number, conservative, calculated to minimize the marital share. He cited the business's revenue history, its equipment value, its client roster, its market position in the regional commercial printing sector. What he did not cite in any meaningful way was the financing structure that had made the business's 14 years of operation possible. He mentioned the credit facility in a footnote. He did not mention the guarantee structure at all. Augustin reviewed the report with the specific attention of a man who had spent 15 years in commercial financing disputes and understood exactly what a footnote was designed to conceal. He retained his own appraiser, a Providence-based firm with experience in both commercial real estate and business valuation, and asked them to produce a report that accounted for the guarantee structure and Joanna's operational financing role as components of the business's enterprise value. The report took 4 weeks. It valued the business at $2.2 million. It dedicated 11 pages to the guarantee structure, its role in the original financing, its role in each subsequent renewal, the commercial impossibility of the business's operation without a qualifying guarantor, and the estimated cost to the business of securing an alternative guarantor on the open market, if such a guarantor could have been found. The operational financing role was valued separately. 12 years of full-time financing management, without title or compensation, calculated at a market rate for a commercial relationship officer at a regional bank. The report concluded that Joanna Whitfield's equitable contribution to the business enterprise represented approximately 60% of the enterprise's value over the period of the marriage. 60%. Brennan's attorney filed a counter-argument. The argument was detailed and, Augustin acknowledged, professionally executed. It challenged the guarantee valuation methodology, the market rate compensation calculation, and the applicability of the 60% figure under Rhode Island equitable distribution law. It did not challenge the existence of the guarantee. It did not challenge the enforceability of the covenant. It could not. Both of those things were documented, and the documents were in the binder. And the binder was now part of the formal record. Augustin's response was methodical. He addressed each challenge point by point, the valuation methodology, the compensation calculation, the legal applicability, and he did it in the register of a man who had read a great many counter-arguments and found most of them resistible. The exchange went on for 6 weeks. At the end of it, Brennan's appraiser's position had shifted. Not to 60%, that was never going to be the final number, but to a negotiated midpoint that acknowledged Joanna's financing role as material to the enterprise's value. Material, the word landed differently now. Then, the credit facility renewal deadline moved into view. 8 weeks had passed since Augustin's letter. The renewal was now approximately 3 weeks away. The business's quarterly receivables cycle was entering its peak. The operational timeline was no longer abstract. It was 8 business days. It was a calendar with a date circled. Brennan's attorney called Augustin on a Tuesday morning. The conversation lasted longer than the first one. Augustin called me afterward and described it with the precision I had come to associate with him. Not editorializing, not performing, just the sequence of what was said and what it meant. Brennan's team wanted to know whether Joanna intended to execute the renewal. Augustin had said that his client's intentions regarding the renewal were her own, that she was under no legal obligation to execute, and that the appropriate venue for resolving questions about the credit facility's future was the settlement conference that they had already agreed to schedule. The settlement conference was set for 3 weeks out. 3 days after that call, Brennan's attorney made a second approach, not through Augustin, but through a mutual acquaintance, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had handled some of the business's insurance work, and who had known us both for years. Gerald called me on a Thursday evening and asked, in a tone he clearly found uncomfortable, whether I had any flexibility in my position. He did not use the word flexibility as a question. He used it the way people do when someone has told them to sound it out without committing anything to paper. I told Gerald that I had retained counsel, and that any communication regarding the matter should go through Augustin's office. I was not unkind about it. Gerald was not an enemy. He was a man who had been asked to make a call he did not want to make, and who knew, probably, that it was not going to go anywhere. He said he understood. He asked how I was holding up. I told him I was fine. He said he was glad to hear it. We said goodbye. I called Augustin the following morning and told him about the contact. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's interesting." He did not elaborate, but I knew what he meant. The approach through a third party, informal and unrecorded, meant that Brennan's team was looking for a way to change the terms of the conversation without leaving a trail. It meant they were more concerned than their formal posture suggested. It meant the structural fact was doing exactly what Augustin had intended it to do. "Don't communicate with him again," Augustin said. Not harshly. As information. I told him I had no intention of doing so. The following week brought something I had not anticipated, which was a call from Brennan himself. He had not contacted me directly since the divorce filing. Everything had gone through counsel, and his voice on the phone was different from the voice I had known for 22 years. Flatter, more careful. The voice of a man who was thinking about what he was saying while he said it. He asked if we could talk, not through the lawyers. He meant in person. He wanted to meet for coffee, somewhere neutral, somewhere that was not a conference room. I asked him what he wanted to discuss. He said he thought there might be a way to resolve things that was better for both of us. Better, he said. Have you ever noticed, dear listeners, how the people who have been the most certain in their positions always discover the value of mutual benefit at exactly the moment the ground shifts under their feet? I told him that my position had not changed. I told him that Augustin would be at the settlement conference and that any resolution needed to happen there. He was quiet for a moment. Then, he said something I had not expected. He said that he was sorry the attorney's letter had used that word. Non-material. He said he had not written it and that he wished it had been phrased differently. I thought about that for a moment. I thought about 14 years of credit renewals and covenant reviews and phone calls with bank officers and the binder on the desk in the study and the 14 signatures on page 34. And I thought about how a different phrasing would not have changed any of those facts, and about how the apology was coming now and not before, and what the timing of an apology tells you about its origins. I told him I would see him at the settlement conference. Then I hung up the phone and sat in the study for a while with the afternoon light coming through the window and the binder on the desk in front of me. I did not feel sorry for him. I did not feel triumphant. I felt, instead, the particular clarity of a person who has done the preparation and needs only to wait for the meeting. Augustin sent a confirmatory letter to Brennan's attorney the following day, reiterating the settlement conference date and noting that all further communications should be conducted through counsel. He mentioned, in a single sentence, that his client was aware of certain informal outreach that had occurred, and wished to memorialize that her position remained unchanged. That sentence cost Brennan's team 3 hours of billable time, I was later told, as they worked out exactly what it implied about what I knew and what I intended. The settlement conference was set for 3 weeks out. I want to tell you, dear listeners, about the week before the settlement conference, because I think it matters. Not because anything dramatic happened. Nothing dramatic happened. But because the way time moves in the week before, something you have been building toward for months, is particular, and I think you will understand it. I went to the Olneyville facility once that week. I had not been there in 2 months. I drove out on a Thursday afternoon, late enough that the light was already low, and I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before I went in. The building is industrial, concrete block, corrugated metal on the loading dock side, the kind of structure that has no pretensions to beauty, but has the particular dignity of a thing that functions well. Through the walls, you could hear the offset presses running. You could smell the ink from the parking lot. The warm air exhaust from the production floor came out through the ventilation louvers on the north wall and hit the cold February air and turned to vapor. I had kept this place running for 14 years, not by operating the presses, not by managing the staff or selling the accounts, but by making certain that the financial structure under all of those things held, that the credit line renewed, that the covenant requirements were met, that the lender's relationship was maintained, that the name on page 34 was legible and creditworthy and present. None of that was visible from the parking lot. None of it was visible from inside the building, either. It was visible only in the filing cabinet in the study on College Hill, in a binder that Brennan had never opened. I sat in the parking lot for about 10 minutes. Then I drove back to the townhouse. On Saturday, Oscar called. He is 24, in graduate school in Boston, engineering, which is its own kind of precision. He had heard about the divorce from Brennan or from a mutual family contact. I had not told him directly because I had not wanted to pull him into it before there was something definite to tell. He called in the evening. The conversation was short, because Iskur is economical with language in a way that I recognize and appreciate. "Are you going to be all right?" he asked. I thought about the binder on the study desk, about page 34, about the 11-week timeline that was now 3 weeks in a settlement conference. "I have the paperwork," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." He knew what paperwork meant, coming from me. He asked me to call him after the conference. I told him I would. That night, I went to the study and took the binder off the desk and held it for a moment. It was heavier than it looks. 4 inches of credit agreements, renewal after renewal, 14 years of them, all of it building toward a single page that said one name and not another. I set it back on the desk and went to bed. The morning of the settlement conference was a Wednesday. Late February, the river still gray, the streets wet from overnight rain, the sky the flat, even color that February in Providence saves for its most consequential days. I dressed the way I always dress, pressed cotton shirt, dark straight trousers, the wardrobe of a former bank officer. I wore my hair in a low ponytail, the way I always wear it. I am not a woman who dresses for effect. I am a woman who dresses for function. I carried the binder to my car. I drove to the financial district. The building that houses Augustine's firm is a 1920s commercial structure, brick and granite, with a lobby that smells of old stonework and, on wet days, faintly of the river a few blocks away. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. Augustine was already in the conference room when I arrived. He had 2 espresso cups on the credenza and the conference table cleared of everything except a legal pad and 2 document folders. Brennan arrived with his attorney 12 minutes later. I had not seen Brennan since the divorce filing. He looked the same and, at the same time, subtly altered in the way people are altered when they have been under pressure for several months. The particular tension around the eyes and jaw of someone who has been waiting for something they cannot control. He was wearing a business suit, which was unusual for him. He spent his working days at the facility in business casual, closer to the presses. The suit said he understood this was a different kind of day. He did not look at me when he sat down. His attorney opened. He spoke for approximately 4 minutes. The business's valuation, the proposed equitable distribution framework, the operating considerations that made any abrupt structural change to the business's financing a concern for both parties. He was professional and careful. He used the phrase mutually beneficial resolution twice. Augustine let him finish. Then Augustine opened one of the 2 document folders on the table and removed the credit facility agreement. He set it on the table between the 2 parties, cover page up. He opened it to page 34. He set it so that the text faced Brennan and his attorney. Then he opened the 2nd document folder and removed the non-material letter, Brennan's attorney's letter, and set it beside the credit agreement, quote side up, so that the sentence was readable. He did not say anything immediately. He let both documents sit there, adjacent. Then he said, "My client serves as sole personal guarantor on the commercial revolving credit facility, a $2.1 million line, as documented on page 34 of the executed agreement." He said it the way you say something that is in the record and therefore does not need to be argued, as information, not advocacy. The annual renewal is due in 18 days. My client's position regarding the renewal is structural, not adversarial. We are here to resolve the equitable distribution. Brennan's attorney looked at both documents. I watched him read the guarantor line. I watched him look at the letter. He said something about the business's operational needs and the importance of continuity. Augustine acknowledged this. Then, Brennan looked at page 34. This is what I want to be precise about, because it is the moment that matters and I want to describe it correctly without overstating it. He looked at the guarantor line. His eyes moved to it directly, the way eyes move to something they already know they need to confirm, and he read it. My name. Written there. His name. Absent. He read it for a long time, not seconds, closer to a full minute, which in a conference room of 4 people is an interval with weight in it. Then he looked at the non-material letter. He read the 3rd paragraph. He set both of his hands flat on the table in front of him. A gesture I recognized. It was a version of what he did when he was buying time, when he needed his body to be still while his mind caught up to something. He had done it at difficult client meetings, at vendor negotiations, at any table where the situation had shifted and he needed a moment to find solid footing. The certainty left his face the way a tide goes out, gradually, and then all at once, and with no indication it intends to return. He looked at his attorney. His attorney was writing something on the legal pad and did not look up. He looked away first. The settlement terms were accepted within the hour. I did not watch his face while the terms were read. I looked at the binder on the table, at page 34, still open, still facing the same direction, and I let the lawyers do their work. The final terms were these. I kept the College Hill townhouse, appraised at $1.3 million, outright. The printing facility real estate, jointly titled, appraised at $890,000, was split at the standard 50%, which meant $445,000 to me. The business's enterprise value was settled at a negotiated $1.85 million, with my equitable contribution recognized at 59%, a figure that, in dollar terms, produced a distribution of approximately $1.1 million. Total equitable distribution to Joanna Whitfield, approximately $2.84 million in assets, including the townhouse I was already living in. Brennan's attorney signed first. Brennan signed second. He did not look at page 34 again. I signed last. The pen was a plain one, Augustine's. A practical ballpoint from a cup on the credenza. Not significant, not symbolic. Just a pen, doing what pens do when the documents are in order and the names are in the right places. I said thank you to Augustine in the lobby. He shook my hand once, firmly, and said that it had been a clean case. He meant it as a compliment, and I took it as one. Then I walked outside into the wet February air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with the smell of the river coming up from the waterfront and the flat gray light doing nothing at all to the buildings around me. I thought about Oscar. I took out my phone and sent him a message. It's done. He replied in less than a minute, a single word, which was enough. Providence in late winter does not soften for conclusions. It stays gray and wet and specific, the city of what actually happened rather than the city of what you imagined. I had lived in it for 48 years, and I understood that about it. I walked to my car. I drove back to College Hill. I went inside, hung up my coat, and made tea. Brennan found a family member guarantor, a younger cousin, I was told, with qualifying credit and sufficient assets. It took him 14 weeks to find her and execute the renewal. The facility renewed in late June. Operations survived, but narrowly, the receivables gap had required emergency bridge financing during the gap period, at a rate that was uncomfortable. The business continued. I did not follow its continuations closely. I converted the study into something with better light. The filing cabinet went to storage. The desk stayed. It is a good desk, solid wood, the kind that does not go anywhere just because circumstances change. I replaced the task lamp with something warmer. I took the chair that had been beside the fireplace and moved it to the window, where the light is better in the afternoons. In spring, when the Providence River loses its ice and the light starts to have an angle again, the study window becomes the best room in the house. The binder is in a storage unit on the other side of the city, in a fireproof cabinet that I own. I kept one item from it, the credit facility agreement, most recent renewal, removed from the binder and placed in a manila envelope. Page 34 is on top. My name is on page 34. Brennan's name is not. I will not need to show it to anyone. But I have kept it, because it says, in the plainest possible language, what I was for 14 years, the person whose name was on the line, the person whose signature held the structure in place, the person without whom the whole thing could not have been renewed. The porch of the townhouse faces College Street. In the spring, when the semester returns to the hill and the students come back to the neighborhood, the street has a different quality, moving and young and indifferent to what happened in the houses around it, which is as it should be. I sit on the porch sometimes in the afternoons. I have a porch chair I bought in March, the first week after the settlement. I drink tea and watch the street, and I do not think about much. The city is still gray in early spring, but the gray is different, lighter, moving toward something. The binder is not there. The filing cabinet is not there. The study is full of afternoon light and is very quiet. Iskur came down from Boston in March, 3 weeks after the settlement. He stayed for a weekend. He is not a sentimental person, and neither am I, so we did not speak much about what had happened. We ate dinner at a place on Wickenden Street that he remembered from when he was young. We walked along the river on Saturday afternoon. He helped me move the study chair to its new position by the window and agreed that the light was better there. On Sunday morning, before he drove back to Boston, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me for a moment. I always figured you were the one keeping it running, he said. I thought about page 34. About 14 signatures. About the warmth of the Olneyville facility at night, and the sound of the presses through the wall, and the binder on the desk in the study, and all the years it had sat there, waiting. I said. He nodded once and picked up his bag and left. The kitchen was quiet after the door closed. The light through the window was the particular light of a late February Providence morning, flat even, and entirely without pretension. I finished my tea. Know the difference between invisible and powerless, dear listeners. They are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. A guarantor is invisible. She does not appear on the masthead or the company materials or the business cards. She is not introduced at the industry dinners as anything other than a wife. She sits in a study in a house on a hill, and she reads 38-page credit agreements, and she signs page 34, and she maintains the relationship with the lender, and she files the renewals in chronological order, and the whole structure rests on her name, and nobody in the building with the presses and the ink and the smell of paper and the warmth of the offset press running all night has any idea that her name is the only reason any of it is possible. The people who confuse those two things, who see the invisibility and read it as powerlessness, will pay for the confusion eventually. Brennan's attorney wrote non-material without knowing what my name was on. He found out on a Wednesday morning in a conference room in the financial district. When Augustine set the binder on the table and opened it to page 34, and Brennan looked at the guarantor line, and then looked at the letter, and then looked away first. Non-material. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done with that letter? Would you have opened the binder, or would you have let them have the word? Share this with someone who has ever been called non-material, someone who knows what it is to hold the structure in place while someone else takes the credit. And thank you, as always, for listening.